Okay, guys, we are going to look at 6.2 properties of parallelograms. It's about my third time trying to record this video, but things kept crashing and not recording right, so fingers crossed for this one. So, parallelograms are quadrilaterals. Quadrilaterals, which means it has 4 sides, as we have already discussed. But they're special, whereas they have 2 pairs or sets of parallel sides. Parallel sides. So if you don't remember what that symbol means, it means parallel. If you look at the 4 properties of parallelograms below, I have already drawn my parallelograms out and added the parallel markings. If you would like to pause the video so you can go ahead and sketch yours before we get into this, you're more than welcome to, or you can do it as we go. So the first property we are going to talk about has to do with the sides. Now we know the sides are parallel, but there's also something else about them. Opposite sides are congruent. So these 2 are congruent to each other, and these 2 are congruent to each other. Makes things really beneficial and helpful as we work through. Okay. Our second major property is that opposite angles are congruent. Opposite angles are congruent. So this angle is congruent to this angle, and these angles are congruent to each other. So opposite angles are congruent, opposite sides are congruent. What else can we discover? Well, we can learn something about their diagonals. So your diagonals go from corner to corner. And your diagonals actually bisect each other. So when I say they bisect each other, I don't mean that the diagonals are congruent to each other. I mean that they cut each other in half. So across from where they meet, either side is congruent. So those 2 pieces are congruent to each other, and these 2 pieces are congruent to each other. You do not know that the diagonals are congruent overall. Please do not assume that. Pretty please. All right, the last major one has to do with angles, and I'm going to go ahead and label my angles so they're a little easier to deal with. And we're going to talk about consecutive angles. So we've talked about consecutive angles before when we were doing parallel lines. Voila, which is why we are here. Parallelogram, parallel lines. Consecutive angles, if you don't remember, are the ones that are next to each other. So the angles that are next to each other are supplementary. They are always supplementary. So angle A is next to angle B. So those 2 add up to equal 180. Angle B is next to angle C and adds up to equal 180. Angle C is also next to angle D, so those 2 are supplementary. And angle D is also next to angle A, therefore those are also supplementary. Now, you know some famous parallelograms. I call them famous just because they're the most basic shapes in life. Rectangles, squares, rhombi, which is the plural of rhombus. So the rhombi, not rhinoceros, but rhombi, is the plural of rhombus. So those are all parallelograms, and we'll get more in depth in those than next week. But first, we got to knock out just plain old regular parallelograms. All right, so let's knock out some examples. My first one here is talking about the side length AB. So the side AB is right here. And looking back at your properties, you really only have one that talks about sides, and it tells you that opposite sides are congruent. So AB is congruent to CD. AB is congruent to CD. Therefore, they are equal to each other. Therefore, AB has to be 10 centimeters. Okay? Finding pieces of information and using them elsewhere. All right, the next example talks about the measure of angle D. The measure of angle D is over here. I'm going to put an X there to represent that. So we're talking about an angle, and of our properties, there's two that talk about angles. One that says opposite angles are congruent, which is true. So angle D and angle B are congruent. Angle C and angle A are congruent. But what I'm actually trying to find is the value of D. And I don't have the value of angle B, so that doesn't help me. What does help me is consecutive angles are supplementary. It's in the box directly above. Angle A and angle D are next to each other, so they are supplementary. So the measure of angle A plus the measure of angle D should equal 180. A is 110. We do not know D, but it's equal to 180. Do a little subtraction, and the measure of angle D is 70 degrees. Excellent. Let's knock out a few more examples here. All right, I've got lots of pieces of information to the right. So if you'd like, you can go through and mark what you know is congruent if you find that helpful or not. So I have these two sides. So ML is opposite of NP. So those two are congruent. So ML is 12. LP is opposite from MN. So those are congruent. 10. LN is a diagonal. Now diagonals, we remember that those diagonals bisect each other. So this is congruent to this. So if LQ is 9 and QN is 9, the whole thing would have to be 18. And we are talking all in meters. Do not forget your units, guys. Do not forget your units. Now, the last thing we need to do is find the measure of angle LPM. So one thing I want to remind y'all, so LPM, this angle right in here, this is a parallelogram, so I have parallel sides. Opposite sides are parallel to each other, which create alternate interior angles. So this angle and this angle are congruent. So angle LPM has a measure of 62 degrees. Whew, parallelograms, guys. Doing great. Keep it up. Got a few more examples to get us through, and then you should be all set. All right, looking at number 7, we're going to find x and y. So we know a few things. Opposite angles are congruent. But one has an x and one has a y, so that's not going to help me first. I can't start there. I need to find something that has another variable that matches up with one of those. So I have angle x plus 8 and 3x. Those are consecutive angles, therefore they are supplementary. The measure of angle D plus the measure of angle C should equal 180. Plug those pieces in, x plus 8 plus 3x equals 180. Combine like terms, and I'm going to go ahead and subtract my 8 to the other side. That's a 4. That looks like a 9. And that's going to give me 172 divided by 4, and x is equal to 43. Now x is equal to 43. I need to plug that in. So 3 times 43 is going to give me an angle of 129. Since this is congruent with y plus 9, I'm going to say y plus 9 equals 129. So y has to be 120. And I'll be back shortly.